Sebastián has gained worldwide respect for his innovative research and study of the terroir. He's been awarded a number of international accolades, twice Winemaker of the Year by the British chain Gaucho Grill, also Winemaker of the Year by the English critic Tim Atkin in his 2016 Argentina special report. Sebastián was also listed first by Decanter in a selection of top 10 South American winemakers, and more recently nominated Innovator of the Year by Wine Enthusiast. So really, we're truly honored to have you here with us at this Circle of Wine Writers webinar, and thank you for the time you've made to be with us.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, and hello, everybody. First, my English is not perfect, so if you don't understand something, please ask me. Second, everything that you are going to listen is the view of one winemaker making wine in one place in the world. So it's not any truth, it's how is my view about the place where I make wine and how is the philosophy of the family. So everything is my cosmovision about what we are doing in our area. I have a presentation that I will share with you. Let me check. Can you see now, Zuccardi, Ucovale? Okay.
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. First, for me, when we talk about wine, we talk about the place, we talk about the people, and this is a little bit the summarize. And when we talk about the people, we talk about the history of the region where you cultivate, and you talk also about the history of the family in my case. A little bit, the short history is that my grandfather, who is in the picture with my grandmother, he started the family company in 1963, but he didn't have any relationship with wine. He had a building company. But his obsession was the desert, and where we live is a desert because the Andes isolate us from the ocean. So we cultivate in a very continental weather, maybe one of the most continental around the world. And the only way to cultivate is with irrigation. And the obsession of my father was the efficient use of the water. Always when I was a child, every time that I went to the vineyard with him, he goes to the limit between the desert and the vineyard. And he always told me, if you want to cultivate, you need to fight with the desert, because the desert all the time try to recuperate what is part of the desert. So his obsession was all the time the use of the water. And my grandfather started in Maipú. He bought a property near to Mendoza, and he put his irrigation system, and his idea was plant some vineyards and make a showroom. And luckily for me, he discovered that his passion was agriculture, and he decided to continue planting vineyards. But then when my father joined the company, my father decided to put his life in wine. He's really passionate about wine, and was the big growth of the family. And today we are also the third generation working in the family. And the interesting thing of the third generation is that every of us bring something new to the family. I think family companies can be the hell or the heaven. All depend how much freedom you have in order to decide what you want to do. And in my case and my brother and sister case, we were very lucky because we had the opportunity to choose our way, and we have a lot of freedom to make new things or change the things in the way that had been doing before. And in my case, I decided to put my life in wine, but I decided to move a little bit the gravity center of the family from an area that is Maipú to the Uco Valley. I really fell in love with the Uco Valley, so I said to my father, we have to go to cultivate to the Uco Valley. And in 2004, I started planting vineyards in the Uco Valley. And in 2009, I started with the research and development area. That this was a little bit the revolution of the winemaking of the family. And in 2016, we built our new winery in the Uco Valley. Julia managed the hospitality of the family. We have 3 restaurants in the family, and Julia runs the 3 restaurants and the 2 tourist center. Mendoza, before the lockdown and before the COVID, has been growing a lot the wine tourists. So we have a great opportunity in the area. And Miguel brought a new activity for the family, not new for the area, that is olive oil. And I can say, because I'm not making, but he is the best olive oil producer today in the country, because all his view about the olive oil is in a quality way. So today we are working the 3rd generation, and each of us bring something new to the family. So the feeling of us is like founders. We don't feel that we are continue what our grandfather or father did. We feel that we are refounding the company all the time. A little bit about Argentina, you know that you know a lot, but for me, if I have to give you a definition about what is Argentina, Argentina is like old world in new world. And why I say this? Because when you see Argentina in the new world countries, Argentina is completely different, because first the history, all our viticulture started because we had a big immigration from Spain, from Italy, and also from France. And this immigration brought the tradition to make wine and drink wine. So we are the 5th largest producer, but until the 90s, all the wine that Argentina produced was drinking in the country. So Argentina really is quite new in the export market, but is very old making and drinking wine. And when you see the consumption of the wine in the country, 75% is drinking in the country. So really wine is part of our culture. And when you see the quantity of wineries that you have in the country, making wine is close to 900. So really wine is part of our history. And when you see this map of Argentina that you have in our right, maybe if you saw this map 20 years ago, this map was like shorter in terms of wine areas. What is happening today in Argentina is happening that every time we are cultivating northern, you have new areas southern, you have new areas cultivating near to the ocean, and when you come to Mendoza, we are climbing to the mountain. So what is happening, not in terms of volume, in terms of new exploration, is that like the wine areas are stretching. So we are breaking the limits today in Argentina in the areas that we used to cultivate. But if you see, 97% of the wine is doing in the west area of Argentina. So, or more, or 99 maybe, but mainly of the wine is made near to the Andes mountain. So if I have to give a definition about the wines that we are making, that we are making in Argentina, I like to say that we make mountain wines. It's like when you travel to Galicia, for example, and they say Atlantic wines or ocean wines. I feel that everything that happened in our area is in relationship with the mountain. I put this picture, that is the picture of our winery in the Uco Valley, and it's clear that we cultivate in flat areas, but very close to the Andes mountain. And if we continue traveling to the Uco Valley, the first thing that I will come back to the Argentinian map, as you know, 30 years ago was enough to talk about Argentina. Then we started talking about the north, the Patagonia, the Cuyo or Mendoza. But when you go to Mendoza, you can see that it's not enough to talk about Mendoza. And I like this satellite picture because in this satellite picture, I put in green the areas that are cultivating, and I put in blue the rivers, the main rivers that cross Mendoza. But if you see this picture, it's very clear how dry is Mendoza, how we live in a desert, that is isolated from the Pacific, is isolated from the Pacific for the Andes Mountain, and it's very far from the Atlantic. So we have no ocean influence. When you cross the Andes, you can see how green is Chile, and when you cross in the other side, how gray in terms of no rain is Argentina. And when you start going near to the Atlantic, you can see that you have a greener situation again for the influence of the Atlantic. So if I have to give you a definition, we cultivate in a high altitude desert. When you analyze Chile and Argentina, we are countries that we are very close in terms of geography, but in terms of winemaking situations is very, very different because the influence of the ocean. And when you go inside of Mendoza, you need to divide Mendoza at least in 5 different areas that I put there: south, east, north, center, and Uco Valley. Why I'm cultivating in the Uco Valley and why I fell in love with the Uco Valley? Because if you see in this map, the Uco Valley is the west-south, and is the closer area to the mountain. And if I want to make mountain wines, I was looking the influence of the Andes Mountain. But one thing that we have to know that for many years was again enough to talk about the Uco Valley, but today when we see the Uco Valley, we need to divide the Uco Valley. And the first division that we have to do the Uco Valley is through the rivers, that the rivers divide our departments. But this department that is Tupungato, Tunuyán, and San Carlos is the politic division. It's not a division that is enough to talk about wine. But I like this picture because in this picture, you can see the altitude lines. And for me, it's very impressive when you see how every time that we go to the west, how we rise in altitude. At this altitude, that is one of the, or is the main climate factor. First, we have to know that every time that we talk about altitude, we need to relationship with latitude. Why? And I will come back a little bit to the map. Why I'm saying that? Because it's not the same to cultivate in the north of Argentina that in Mendoza or in the south. Every time that you go to the north, you are moving to a warmer area. So you need to climb the mountain in order to look for cooler weather. So if you want to compare altitude, you need to be at the same latitude. Why? Because in terms of altitude, in general, we say higher, cooler. But what's happened when you compare an area in the north with an area here is that you are changing the situation. So in the north, 2,000 meters in general is warmer than in Mendoza, 1,100 meters of altitude. But when you go to the same latitude, like the Uco Valley, in general, we have to know that every time that we move to the west, we are rising in altitude. And what means rise in altitude? Move to cooler weather. And the interesting thing in our area is that, for example, in Tupungato, you can move from 1,000 meters to 1,700 meters in 20 kilometers. And in these 20 kilometers, you change a lot the altitude. So the weather situation changed a lot. For example, you can find 3 or 4 different Winkler areas in this short distance. So one of the main important things in terms of the influence of the mountain is the altitude. And the altitude gives to us a lot of diversity in terms of weather in an area like the Uco Valley. But like I told you, when you go to Tupungato, Tunuyán, and San Carlos, you have in general in the bottom not very suitable areas for vineyard because are low in altitude and the soils are very deep. And every time that you go up, the areas in general are better. So talk about Tupungato is not enough because in Tupungato you can have great areas near to the mountain and not very good areas at the bottom. In Tunuyán and San Carlos, the same situation. So if we want to talk about wine in the Uco Valley, we need to go one step more and talk about the villages. I put here, this is not an official map. This is a map that is my interpretation that how could finish a little bit a village division in the Uco Valley. Why is not official? Because we are now working in a system that is geographic identifications. And some of these villages are now geographic identification, but others are not already done. So we'll take time in order to can study and certify other IG. But when you see this map today, Paraje Altamira is an IG. There is a new area here that is another IG, that is Pampa El Cepillo. There is another IG here that is not approved, but will be approved soon, I think. La Consulta is an IG, Vista Flores is an IG, Los Chacalles is an IG, San Pablo is an IG, Gualtallarí is close to be an IG. So this map that you are seeing is work in progress. And the other thing that I feel that will happen is that some of these IGs will need a future division. Because for example, in an area like Gualtallarí, you start at 1,100 meters and you finish at 1,650 meters. So also inside of Gualtallarí, because the altitude and because the kind of soil that you can find, maybe in the future will need another division. So we are working a lot all together in the wine business in terms of IG, but this is a work that maybe will take more than one generation. Continue studying, understanding, and dividing. When we talk about mountain wines, that I will come back to the concept, for me, mountain wines is because the water, the weather, and the soils. So the mountains give all our identity in terms of wine. And when we talk about climate, I told you a high altitude desert where altitude is a very important factor, but light is something that we, not every time we talk a lot, but it's a very, very important factor. Yes? Okay, you know this is the situation that I explained, that we are isolating from the Pacific, so we live in a desert in high altitude, where this is, for example, a land near to my Altamira field, and you can see that without water is not enough because we have very few rain and very bad distribution of that rains. So you can have 30%, 35% of all the rain of the year in one rain, and then you can be 2 or 3 months without any rain. Altitude, that we talk about altitude, and light. Light is a very important factor because in Mendoza we have more than 300 days with sunlight or blue sky, and this sunlight is extremely pure for two situations. First, because we are high, so we are closer to the sun, but second, because the air is extremely dry, so the light has a very low filtration, and the pureness of the light that we have is very intense. And this is interesting because in the Uco Valley at high altitude, you are cultivating in cooler weathers, like Winkler 2 in some areas, with a very pure sunlight. So it's not an usual situation because in general, when you move to cooler weathers, you are moving to wetter weathers. Okay, in our area, we have a cooler weather situations with a lot of sunlight. And I think our wines, the expression of our wines talk about this light. The other thing that the mountain gives to us is the water. The Andes isolate and create the desert, but then give us the water that we use to irrigate. But in order that you understand how low is the availability of water is with the snowmelt, we only can irrigate 3% of the surface of Mendoza. All the other is a desert because you have no water. And many times you can see places that you say, okay, the altitude here is good, the soil is good to plant a vineyard, but you have no water. So water is really the limit factor in order to can cultivate an area. And the third thing that the Andes mountain give to us are the soils. All the soils, or not all, 99% of the soils where we are cultivating are alluvial soils. What means that? Means that millions of years ago, we had big glaciers in the mountain. All these glaciers melt and all the water came from the Andes to the flat areas. And with all the water moving with this energy, move material. So all the place where we are walking and when we are cultivating is material that came from the Andes mountain millions of years ago. But the question is, all the alluvial soils are the same? And the answer is no, we have a lot of diversity. And we talk a lot about the altitude diversity, but now we have to cross this altitude diversity with soil diversity. And we have very special alluvial soils for two factors. First, because the origin of the materials, the diversity of the origins of the material, and second, because the movement was with a lot of energy, very disorganized, and the short distance. It was not that the material traveled like 500 kilometers to arrive to the place where we are cultivating. It was really a big movement, a short movement, and very disorganized. So you have two origins of diversity in terms of soil. This is how is an alluvial soil, but the first origin of diversity is not the same to be close to the beginning of the alluvial fan that being the same that be at the bottom. So when you see it, when you cross an alluvial fan from the west to the east, you can see that in the areas that are you closer from the mountain, the water left more and bigger stones. And when you start going down where the water spread and we're losing energy, the water left smaller stones and a little bit deeper. And when you go to the bottom of the alluvial fan, you have no any stone because the water didn't have energy. So happened that the same alluvial fan can create different areas. A clear example of this, for example, is the alluvial fan of the Tunujan River, that I will show you a picture later, that create at the beginning of the alluvial fan an area that we call Altamira. And when you go to Altamira, you can see that you have very stony soils with big stones. And then in the middle, we have an area that the name is La Consulta. And when you go to walk La Consulta, it's difficult to see stones. And when you do, when you dig, you can see that you have 50 centimeters, 80 centimeters of soils, and then you have the stone. So the same alluvial fan can give us a lot of diversity in terms of soil in one area. And the second origin of diversity is that when you see the Andes mountain and you see this picture, in general, you think that the Andes mountain is one big mountain. But when you see a satellite picture, the first thing that we have to know is that we have three chains of mountains. First, the Precordillera, that is the oldest. Second, the Cordillera Frontal. And third, the Cordillera Principal. And when you see where is the Uco Valley is in front of the Cordillera Frontal. So the first interesting thing that we have in the Uco Valley is that we don't have Precordillera. So all the materials where we are walking and cultivating came from the Frontal Cordillera and the Principal Cordillera. And when you see a geological map of the Frontal Cordillera and the Principal Cordillera, immediately you can see that you have a lot of diversity in terms of materials. There are many theories about how the Andes mountain were formed, but was a crash of plates. And when you see the Frontal Cordillera, in general, all what you have are volcanic and metamorphic, so it's full of granite. But when you go to the Principal Cordillera, you are going to find granite also, but for example, you are going to find a lot of calcaire because part of this Andes mountain was under the water. So at 5,000 meters of altitude, you can find fossils, for example. And when these alluvial movements happen, what happened? All the material from the Principal Cordillera and the Frontal Cordillera were mixed. So one thing that is unique, for example, in our area is that in some villages in the Uco Valley, like Altamira, like San Pablo, and like Gualtallari, you can find a unique combination, for example, that is granite that come from mainly from Cordillera Frontal and calcium carbonate that has in theory two origins or two sources. One that is the Cordillera Frontal, and the other is that because the dry conditions, some of the calcaire materials were formed there. So, for example, this is fossils that we can find 10 kilometers from my Altamira vineyard, and you can see how the roots growing, hugging all these stones. And when you come back to the Uco Valley, you see this map, you understand now that all this map has different altitudes, but then you choose, for example, 5 areas in the Uco Valley, and in a random way, I will choose Altamira, Los Chacalles, San Pablo, Gualtallarí, and La Consulta, because are areas that I like and I know a lot. You can see the difference in terms of soil that you can find. So when you cross the altitude that you have here, and when you cross the kind of soil that you are going to see, it's clear that the only way to talk about our wines is through the villages or through the places. It's for that that in the last years, all my focus has been talk about the place, not about the grape. And this is clear that when you make a wine here and you put only the grape, here only the grape, here only the grape, and here only the grape, you are talking about the commodity. But when you talk about the places, you are talking about the uniqueness of our place, that this combination that is landscape, because also when you visit all these areas, you have a completely different landscape. You have also, depending the altitude, a different how to say, flora, vegetation, natural vegetation, and this natural vegetation has also an impact in the wine, and you have different weathers and you have different soils. So my focus in the last years has been in this, has been in be very work very deep in try that our wines tell the history of the place. But also, like I told you, we have a lot of variation in terms of soil. So another thing that I will show you in a couple of minutes is also inside of one area, we can have a big variation in terms of different kind of soil. So also this kind of formation of soil gave us the possibility to, in one vineyard, can divide the property per different kind of soil. In the family, we have 6 vineyards in the Uco Valley. These vineyards is 3 we have in Paraje Altamira, 1 in San Pablo, and 2 in Gualtallarí. I like to cultivate in these 3 areas because I feel that these 3 areas are very interesting because the altitude, the position with the mountain, but also the soils. I told you that I like a lot the combination between granite and calcaire. It's not something that happened in all the Uco Valley, but in these 3 areas, because the relationship with the rivers, with the main rivers, that is the Tunuyán and Rio Las Tunas, we have this unique combination. So if I have to show you some pictures, very short pictures of the vineyards, in order that you can understand how different are the vineyards. For example, this is a picture of our Piedra Infinita vineyard. This is a picture of our Canal Uco vineyard. You can see the size of the stones and how close we are from the Andes. This is another vineyard that we have in Los Membrillos. Every vineyard has a completely different landscape, and for me it's very important because when I talk about our finca wines, I try to express the uniqueness of this place. When you go to San Pablo, we are rising to 1,400 meters in an area that is extremely close to the mountain. So this is one of the, or is the coldest area in the Uco Valley planted today, because it's high, but also because it's very close to the mountain. So the expression of the wines that we have there is completely different. And then when you go to Gualtallarí, you have a situation where you are going to find some ridge inside or close to the vineyard. So for example, now we are planting some ridge in our vineyard in Gualtallarí. So my challenge is try to use all the diversity in terms of places that the Uco Valley give to us, but also all the diversity in terms of situations that we have in the different vineyards. One thing about Malbec that for me is very important. I believe that the future of Argentina is in places. When people ask me what is coming after Malbec, I try to answer more Malbec, but explain in a different way that is explained through the places. I'm not thinking that there are more grapes that has a great adaptation to the place, because when you see how Cabernet Franc growth, or how Chardonnay is growing, or other grapes that has a lot of history in the country like Bonarda and Torrontés, you can see that there are more than Malbec grape that can adapt very well. But I feel that really the best vehicle to express our places is Malbec. And when I think about Malbec, I think that we are very lucky, because Malbec was not a marketing plan. Malbec was something that happened in the field. Malbec, when this immigration came from Italy, Spain mainly, and France, they brought grapes from all these places. And at the beginning, all these grapes were planting. But generation and generation of growers that they were focused in the field, because at that time they didn't make varietal wines, they made red and white wines, they continue replanting and replanting Malbec. Why? Because when you walk the vineyards, when you taste the grapes, and when you make the wine, you can see how fantastic is the adaptation of Malbec to the place. So for me, Malbec is something that happened in the field, and the grape was improved, selecting and replanting for generation and generation of viticultures that they were looking the place. So when I work and when I vinify all these different areas, I feel that Malbec is maybe the grape that has the better adaptation, because when you see in different years how work is fantastic, but also because has the ability to be transparent to the place. When you vinify or taste the Malbec from Altamira, it's completely different than from Gualtallarí, and it's completely different than from San Pablo. So for me, it live that you can see the place. And when I think in Malbec in Argentina, I think immediately in Sangiovese in Tuscany, in Nebbiolo in Barolo, in Pinot in Burgundy. I feel that this grape has the adaptation to be the best vehicle to express our places. And if you want, we can talk a little bit about the winemaking, because one thing that for me is important, I started working in the vineyards. I studied viticulture. I didn't study enology because I grew in the vineyard. All my memories when I was a child were in the vineyard. Riding horse or riding a bicycle or fishing, not working when I was a child, but all my memories and all my relationship was very close to the vineyard. And my father really used to work more in the vineyard than in the winery. So when I finished the secondary school, at that time, the main important person in a winery was the enologist. But I decided not to study enology, and I studied viticulture. And I started really working in the vineyard. For many years, I didn't work in the family in the winery, and I put all my energy in the vineyard. So I like to say that we cultivate wines, because for me, in my view, the main important work is the selection of the place, and then try to cultivate in an order that can make a vine that will live for a long time and can express the place in the most balanced and pure way. So in this, I like to say that I took two very important decisions in my professional life. One was studied viticulture and then traveling. So during 7 years, I was doing the harvest with my family and then traveling to do the harvest in another country. So I work in Italy, Portugal, Spain, France, US. And these kind of travels gave me the opportunity to understand two things: that the place is the most important thing to talk, and the second, that the place where we live and we cultivate has unique conditions when you travel and you see other areas. And the other thing that I like to say is that I'm a drinker before a winemaker. My passion is wine. I love wine. I'm all the time opening and buying wine from all over the world. I try not to drink a lot only my wines. I try to to put in my table wines from other producers from Argentina, but also I buy wine from all over the world because really my passion is wine. So when I think how I will work in the winery, I try to work in a very simple way. In a very, we have to think a lot, we have to see a lot, but we have to be careful every time that we do something. And if we want to do less, we need to know more about our places and about what we want to do, because the cosmovision is something extremely important in the winemaking. So when you see, I will show you, I will show you a picture. I will move fast to 1 second of our winery. Sorry. Can you see the picture of the winery? Okay, the winery that we have in the Uco Valley was we started building in 2013. We did the first harvest in 14 and we finished in 16. And for me, this winery has two very important things. The first is that the winery was created with the legs in the field. So I told you that we divide our property in different kind of soils. So when we started this working in 2009, this work changed our way to see the place, our way to walk the place, and what we need from the winery. Because with this division in terms of soil that we did, and I will show you a map later, this gave to us, we didn't have any more 15,000 kilos of grape altogether. Now we have 3,000 kilos, 1,000 kilos, 4,000 kilos, 2,000 kilos. So we divide all our property per soil. So we needed to build a winery that was prepared for this situation. The first thing that we put in the table when we wanted to build a winery is that we want to make a winery that was in balance with the place where we are cultivating. So we built the winery inspiring in the Andes mountain, and we use all the stones from the area to cultivate, to build this winery. For example, in this vineyard where the winery is, I took out 1,000 tracks with the stones in order to plant the vineyard. It's for that the name is Infinite Stone, the name of the vineyard. And then I use all these stones to build the winery. And the winery inside is 100% concrete vats. I really started in 2009 working with concrete, and I fell in love. I really felt that concrete is a great partner to express our places. So during 10 years before during 7 years before to build a winery, I was working a lot in develop our own vats. And our own concrete vats has a very important thing, that is that are building with sand, stone, and water from our property. So I believe that our concrete vat has a very strong relationship with the place where we are cultivating. And in our winery, all the concrete vats are raw concrete. So we have no epoxy inside of the vats. Why I use concrete? I use concrete for many things. First, because it's more efficient in terms of energy. You have to refrigerate less. Second, because you have no any flavor that goes to the wine. And if I want to talk about the places, I want to respect the flavors and the taste that come from the place. I don't want to have a lot of influence from the winery. The third thing is micro-oxygenation. With concrete, you have micro-oxygenation, but you have less micro-oxygenation than in a small barrel. And for me, Malbec is a grape that we have to take care all the backbone or all the tannic structure, because sometimes can lack a little bit of tannic structure. So the aging in concrete gives us the possibility to have less micro-oxygenation. And for me, in my view, Malbec you have to be careful with the quantity of micro-oxygenation during the aging. And the third thing is philosophy. I feel that it's a natural material and I feel comfortable making wine in concrete. But one thing that I'm very clear is that you can make a great wine in concrete, a great wine in oak, and a great wine in a stainless steel, and you can make a disaster in concrete, a disaster in a stainless steel, and a disaster in oak. All depend the place where you are cultivating and who makes the wine. And for me, it's very important that I feel that concrete is part of my philosophy, but it's not the central thing of the philosophy. The central thing is how we cultivate, how we manage the vineyards, and where we are cultivating. So all the winery is made with concrete, all the concrete in round shapes, because I working with square vats, you can see how difficult it is to work in the corners, and when you work in round shapes, everything has more homogeneous inside. But one thing that is clear, we are not doing nothing new, because when you see the old winery that my grandfather started, was all with concrete. And when you see the old wineries in the 20s or in the 30s in Mendoza, were all built with concrete, because we had a very strong Italian influence. So what we are doing today is back to the future. It's taking old techniques to go to the future. We improve the quality of the vats and the connection with the place. But one thing that is important for me, I'm not saying no oak. I believe that oak is part of the tradition in wine, and I feel that some grapes and some areas, many times a little bit more of micro-oxygenation help a lot. But I'm not using the traditional small barrels, and I'm not using new barrels. The last time that I bought a barrel was 7 years ago. And I moved to 500 liters barrels before that, and fudres and toneles. So today, when you go to our winery, we like oak, but we like big sizes of oak, because we have less influence and we have less micro-oxygenation through the grape. And for example, Cabernet Franc, that is a grape that I like a lot, I feel that Cabernet Franc works better in fudres. So for example, all the aging of Cabernet Franc in general is in fudres. So the challenge is, depend what we are doing, is the way that we are going to do. This is a little bit the philosophy in the winery. Let me see if I can show you one more thing that I need to see if I can open. One second. I want to do a double click in Altamira. Let me. Sorry that. I have the picture that I can come back to the screen to share. Okay, here. Let me show you something about the diversity of a place like Altamira. When you go to, are you seeing two soils, two pits?
Yes, yep.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
When you go to Altamira, in general, the soils are like this. They have big stones, and all these stones are white when you see, because all these granite stones were surrounded by calcium carbonate. And is the stone that I show you, granite inside, calcium carbonate outside. When you go to Gualtajari, for example, is the picture that you have on your left, you can see that you have calcium carbonate, but the way that the calcium carbonate you have in the soil is different. And we call this kind of formation caliche. So when we talk about calcare in our soils, you have different ways to find this calcare. In Altamira, you are going to find always surrounding the stones, but when you go to Gualtajari, you have the possibility to have you can see like layers, like compact layers of sand, clay, and calcium carbonate. But talking about the diversity in terms of soils in one area, if you see this satellite picture of my vineyard, Piedra Infinita, you can see that in the satellite pictures, you have like all rivers that cross the vineyard. And when you go and you dig, you can see that in the same vineyard, you can have areas where the soils, you have 20 centimeters of soil, and then you have the stones, and areas where you can arrive to 1 meter or 1.5 meters of soil, and then the stones. This happened because the alluvial movement was very disorganized, and this created a lot of diversity inside of the properties. So in 2009, in my research and development area, I started a work that was try to understand the diversity that I have in my property. So through a medition of electroconductivity and then many pits, we started dividing our vineyard at the beginning in 3 different families of soils. Soils that we call supercalcario, that are in general the shorter soils of the property. Then a second family that we call gravas calcareas, that is a soil where you have 40, 50 centimeters of soil, and then the stones. And the third family, that is the deep soils, suelos profundos, where in general you have more than 1 meter of soil. With all this information and the quantity, we measure the quantity of calcare and how thick is the quantity of stones with calcare, and we put all this, and after was like 6 years of work, we arrived to divide our property, for example, in 40 different kind of soils. So today the way that we work in the vineyard is dividing the vineyard per soil. So I haven't anymore a vineyard that you have, like I told you, 10 or 15,000 kilos of grape, because today you have all small parts that come from different situations of soil. So the winery that I show you and the winery where I'm cultivating is a winery that is prepared to receive all this diversity. So when I make a finca wine, finca means single vineyard, and for example, a Piedra Infinita wine, that is a wine that comes from this vineyard, for me, it's a work of precision, because first I divide the vineyard, and then I use some of these soils to blend and to create for me the most precise and deep expression of the vineyard. But this changed a lot my life. And also today I'm bottling some parcels by own, not blending the vineyard. Some, for example, 2 areas in the vineyard, I'm putting in a bottle by their own. So my challenge, and when I will show you last picture, I promise. When I talk about our wines, in general, I try that every time that I go up in the pyramid, I try to be more specific about the place where the grapes are coming. So every time, many times, the kind of vinification is quite the same, but the main important thing that change is the place, is the size of the place. So in Q, I make wines that talk about the region. In Polígonos, I make wines that talk about the villages. In Paraje, I talk wines that talk about some areas inside of these villages. In Finca, I talk about single vineyards, and in Parcela, I talk about single plots inside of the property. So my view to think and my view to work in the vineyard is trying to be more specific from where the grapes are coming. And one thing that is my obsession is that we need coherence. Coherence is one of the most important things in a winery. For me, the first wine has to tell you the same history than the top wine, the same way to see the world. Then you can talk about the Uco Valley, of course, and when you talk about the single plot, you're talking about something that is unique. But coherence, for me, is very important. I'm not trying to do the beginning different than the top. Of course, you do different things, but all these differences are in relation with the expression of the place. Okay, I think I talk a lot, sorry.
That's brilliant. So thank you very much indeed. So we've got a question from Tim Atkin.
Yes.
He's asking, are we going to see more dry farm vineyards in Argentina in the future? If so, where will they be planted?
You know, it's not a normal situation. Maybe some places has the possibility to do. For example, I'm cultivating a vineyard in São Paulo that is today the highest vineyard in the Uco Valley at 1,700 and some meters, and I have the possibility not to irrigate there, but it's not a normal situation. In São Paulo, for example, in my property at 1,400 meters, some years like 16 or 14, I didn't irrigate, but really is not the normal situation, but it's something that maybe we are going to see more and more. For me, in my view, irrigation is quite a condition in our area, except in these places that we are talking. And the challenge is how we irrigate, because we can make a fantastic thing with the smart irrigation, or we can do a disaster with a not smart irrigation. So irrigation is a challenge that we have in the vineyards in order to generate a very deep root system.
Very good, thank you very much. So
And
Michelle,
about,
I don't know whether you would like to.
Sorry, Tim asked me, yes, in Atlantic and in Patagonia it's possible. I was focusing, sorry, in the Uco Valley, that is the area where I cultivate. But it's true what Tim is saying, in other areas closer to the ocean, like the Atlantic areas, or in the south, it's possible that happen. And Tim asked me if I would invest there. My problem is that I want to be very concentrated. I don't want to make a lot of things. I want to make few things in a very good way. So I'm not thinking today to plant vineyards in other areas than the Uco Valley, because I want to sleep close to the vineyards that I manage. Because for me, make wine is spend a lot of time in the vineyard. So my challenge today is not to looking for other areas, concentrate in the Uco Valley. And I feel that in the Uco Valley, we have a lot of work to do. Like, for example, this vineyard that I'm planting at 1,700 meters. That is interesting to see that limits that we thought that before was impossible to cross, we are crossing. Sorry.
Not at all, thank you. Michelle, it's a fascinating talk. I don't know whether you'd just like to thank Sebastian. I think we're actually running out of time now, so.
Yes, it was absolutely fantastic, Sebastian. Thank you so much. Very thorough, extremely interesting, and one can see that, you know, you really are making some fantastic wines, and we can understand why. So thank you very much for coming to this talk, and wish you all the best with all your projects.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's better to see in the place. It's easier to walk in the place, because
come and visit you.
You can see more things. You can smell, you can see the landscape, and all these kind of things are part of the wine.
Yeah. No, thank you again.